In the spring of 1811, a sense of morbid curiosity hung in the air of Richmond, Virginia. The clatter of hammers and the groan of lumber signaled not just demolition, but a historical disinterment. Workers, tearing down an old tobacco warehouse, came upon a discovery that would pry open a forgotten and terrifying chapter of the city's past. Beneath the rotting floorboards of a small, windowless chamber, they found not treasure, but 8 identical wooden boxes, each crafted with a grim simplicity. Inside each box, nestled on a bed of dry, crumbling tobacco leaves, lay a man's wedding ring and a small, corked vial of fine white powder. The rings, tarnished with time, bore different names and dates etched into their bands. Edmund Fairfax, 1783, William Randolph, 1794, Thomas Henley, Rammer. The list continued, a chronological procession of tragedy, each name a monument to a life cut short. All 8 men, though separated by fortune and profession, shared one chilling commonality. They had all been the husbands of Ruth Holloway, a refined widow who had, with a staggering regularity, outlived 8 wealthy men in the span of 3 decades. What authorities found in those vials would challenge everything they thought they knew about a woman who had once been the very personification of grace and tragedy. The local magistrate, a man of discreet temperament, ordered the discovery sealed from public record. The official explanation cited matters of delicate nature that could damage the reputation of prominent families. For over 2 centuries, this case has remained buried in the archives of the Virginia Historical Society. But tonight, we're about to unearth the truth behind one of America's most methodical and terrifying killers. Before we delve into the deadly narrative of Ruth Holloway, I want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to journey into America's darkest historical mysteries, and let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. I love connecting with fellow mystery lovers from across the country. The tale of Ruth Holloway, a story far more intricate and chilling than mere circumstance, begins not with murder, but with a deeply personal tragedy that would shape the course of 8 men's lives and deaths. The Virginia of 1780 was a land in flux, its grand plantations stretching along the James River as monuments to a newfound American prosperity. The dust of revolution had settled, but its scars ran deep. Loyalist properties had been seized and redistributed, creating a new class of wealthy patriots while leaving others, like Ruth, seemingly destitute. Ruth arrived in Richmond in the autumn of 1782, a striking woman of 28. Her auburn hair and eyes, the color of winter fog, drew a kind of quiet attention. She presented herself as the grieving widow of Captain Jonathan Holloway, a Continental Army officer who had allegedly died at the Battle of Yorktown. Her story was simple yet heartbreaking. A life of comfort lost, a future unwritten, with only her refinement and intelligence to build a new one. In an era when medicine was more guesswork than science, Ruth's extensive knowledge of herbs and treatments quickly made her invaluable to Richmond's elite. She carried a leather-bound journal filled with remedies passed down, she claimed, through her family. But this was all a meticulously constructed lie. Her real name was not Holloway. Her husband, Jonathan, had been a British spy, operating deep within the Continental Army. He was a man of charm and dangerous ambition, but his true loyalty lay with the crown. In 1779, a shadowy group of American patriots, who themselves were secretly profiting from the war by selling information to both sides, discovered Jonathan's true allegiance. They were an organization known as the Covenant of Prosperity, and Jonathan, a man who knew too much, had become a liability. To eliminate him without implicating themselves, they betrayed him to American forces, knowing he would be executed for treason. They had not only stolen the love of her life, but had turned his death into a patriotic act, cementing their own reputations as heroes. Ruth, in her flight from Philadelphia, had lost everything, including her unborn child. The grief had hardened into a cold, relentless fury. Her goal was not to heal the sick, but to systematically destroy those who had destroyed her. Ruth's first victim was Colonel Edmund Fairfax, a wealthy tobacco merchant who had served as the Covenant's treasurer. She married him within a year of arriving in Richmond. On a humid August night in 1783, less than 6 months after their wedding, Fairfax complained of a stomach ailment. Ruth, ever the devoted wife, prepared him a medicinal tea. The house servant Jupiter saw it all. Peeking through a crack in the study door, he watched his master convulse in agony, clutching his stomach while Mrs. Holloway, with a face of chilling calm, offered him the steaming cup. "Drink this, my dear Edmund," she whispered. "It will ease the pain. I prepared it with special care." The words, meant to soothe, carried a note of cold finality. When Dr. Harrison arrived at dawn, he found Ruth in a state of convincing grief and diagnosed the death as acute gastric fever. There was no evidence of foul play. The vial of poison had been rinsed clean, and Ruth's reputation was beyond reproach. Fairfax's wedding ring, the first of 8, was placed in a small wooden box, a monument to a plan now set in motion. Word of the death spread through the slave community. Network of hushed whispers and knowing glances passed the information from plantation to plantation. Old Caesar, a house servant at the Randolph estate, heard the story from Jupiter, Mrs. Holloway's husband, died of a stomach sickness. Jupiter said, his eyes wide with fear, "Just like I seen a special tea." These stories, born of observation and gut instinct, would never be considered evidence in a court of law, but they would become the true historical record of Ruth's crimes. The slaves noted how Ruth personally prepared her husband's medicines, how she guarded her remedies in a locked chest, and how she would take solitary walks into the woods, returning with baskets of herbs that seemed far more sinister than their common appearance. The deaths followed a grimly predictable pattern. Captain William Randolph, a shipping magnate and the Covenant's lead intelligence broker, succumbed to a bilious fever. Within 8 months of his marriage to Ruth, Judge Thomas Henley, the group's legal advisor, died of a sudden gastric distress during a dinner party, a horrifying spectacle witnessed by dozens of Richmond's elite. Each death solidified Ruth's reputation as a woman of tragedy and herb. "Wealth as a woman of independent means," Dr. Harrison, a man of science, began to harbor private suspicions. But suspicion was not proof, and Ruth's meticulous planning left no trace. The final phase of her campaign began after the death of her 8th victim, Edward Custis, a banker. Ruth had identified the last 2 targets on her list: Dr. Harrison, who had acted as the Covenant's medical contact, and the most powerful man in Virginia, Governor Edmund Randolph, the architect of the entire conspiracy. But an unexpected complication arrived in the form of Captain Jonathan Hale, a federal intelligence officer. Officially, he was in Richmond to settle property disputes. Unofficially, he was a ghost hunter, searching for the truth behind a persistent rumor of a wartime spy ring. Hale, with his military mind and access to confidential files, began to see a pattern where others saw only coincidence. He saw that the victims were all wealthy patriots with questionable wartime activities. He also noticed that Ruth Holloway's history was a complete fabrication. There was no Captain Jonathan Holloway, who died at Yorktown. The woman was an enigma. Hale's investigation led him to a shocking discovery. In a captured British intelligence file, he found a record of a spy named Jonathan, codenamed the Phoenix, and his wife, a woman known only as the Widow. The file revealed that Jonathan was betrayed not by the Americans, but by members of his own network to save themselves from exposure. Hale's military training allowed him to connect the dots. Ruth Holloway was a British loyalist, not a patriot widow, and her campaign of revenge was not for American justice, but for British treason. Meanwhile, Ruth was in the final stages of her plan. She had begun a subtle and sophisticated courtship of Governor Randolph, a man whose ambition was a far greater weakness than his political acumen. She had positioned herself as a potential political asset, a woman of means and keen intellect who could aid his rise to power. What Ruth didn't know was that Randolph, a master of betrayal himself, had learned of her murderous past. But instead of fearing her, he was impressed. He saw a kindred spirit, a weapon to be controlled. He believed that Ruth's skills could be redirected towards his own political enemies. The climax of Ruth's story unfolded on a summer evening. In 1792, Ruth had invited both Governor Randolph and Captain Hale to her mansion for a private dinner. Each man believed he held the upper hand. Hale, convinced of her guilt, believed he was gathering the final evidence to expose her. Randolph, confident in his ability to manipulate her, believed he was forming a new and powerful alliance. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Under the veneer of polite conversation, a deadly tension hung in the air. Ruth spoke of justice and the righteousness of personal retribution. Randolph countered with the pragmatism of power and political necessity. Hale, growing increasingly uncomfortable, tried to change the subject, sensing the trap. "I believe it's time for brandy and honest conversation," Ruth said, leading them into her library. As she moved to the sideboard, she turned to face them, her expression no longer that of a grieving widow, but of a triumphant commander. "Governor Randolph, you believe you have successfully manipulated me. Captain Hale, you believe you have gathered enough evidence to bring me to justice. You are both correct in your assessments, and you are both fatally wrong in your assumptions about what I intend to do with this knowledge." Ruth then revealed the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. There were not 8 members of the Covenant of Prosperity, she said, but 9. Captain Jonathan Hale, the man who had been so diligently investigating her, was the last. He had been the Covenant's intelligence analyst, the one who had identified her husband as a security risk and signed off on his betrayal. The confrontation that followed was swift and brutal. Hale lunged, but Ruth, a master of her deadly art, was prepared. She threw a vial of a powerful, eye-stinging irritant at his face, temporarily blinding him. As Randolph attempted to tackle her, she drew a small pistol, a weapon she had kept for just such a moment, and leveled it at him. "After all these years," she said, "I'm not about to let either of you spoil my moment of triumph." The next morning, the bodies of Governor Randolph and Captain Hale were discovered. The scene was a masterpiece of forensic manipulation. Randolph lay dead from a pistol wound, Hale's own weapon found in his hand. Hale, in turn, appeared to have died from a blow to the head with a heavy decanter, combined with a severe eye injury from a spilled chemical. Ruth, discovered bound and gagged in a closet, provided a compelling, tearful account of a dispute that had escalated into mutual murder. The forgeries she had planted provided a plausible motive, and her self-inflicted injuries made her account believable. With all 9 members of the Covenant eliminated, Ruth Holloway retired from her murderous career. She sold her mansion and lived a long life as a powerful but reclusive figure. She used her vast wealth and her knowledge of society's secrets to manipulate Virginia politics from the shadows. After her death in 1834, her journal was found, a detailed and chilling record of her life's work. It revealed not only the 9 murders, but her continued career as an agent of necessary justice, eliminating dozens of others she deemed corrupt. The document was immediately sealed, too scandalous for the public to ever comprehend. Ruth Holloway died not as a tragic widow, but as a ghost who had haunted the halls of power for decades, a ruthless criminal mastermind who operated with a twisted sense of moral order. She became a historical enigma, a woman who proved that the most dangerous predators are not those who operate outside society, but those who learn to control it from within.